A classic taking us back to the year 2013, Lupe Fiasco with a song titled Kick Push. And before that, I played you Jill Scott with a song titled Golden. Now, last week, we had a very interesting question, and we were speaking about restraint of trade, or 2 weeks ago rather. So, stick around if you want to know what that means and how it can affect you in your day-to-day or career. Man, keep it locked.
Amplify your voice and be heard. Get to know your local business owner. It's Biz Talk on the Biz Hub on Bay FM.
Yes, indeed, it is Biz Talk on the Biz Hub on Bay FM 107.9. And man, oh man, I'm ever so excited to have a legend back in studio. We're fortunate enough. When was the last time we actually on air, Mike? Was it, what, 2 weeks ago? No, it was more actually. It was a month ago.
4 weeks.
Yeah. So Mike is back, and we're going to be talking about restraint of trade. Good sir, welcome. How are you?
Thanks. Good to be back.
Man, it's awesome to have you, Mike. So as you'd remember, a couple of weeks ago, we had a question around restraint of trade as well. And, it's very interesting because it's such a very unique, but also can be a very strenuous clause or rather, law that can affect you when it comes to your career at large. So let's talk about what is restraint of trade. Let's unpack on that first.
Yeah, Tab, so I agree with you. I think it's one of the most contentious clauses when it comes to employment contracts. Generally, there's a lot of back and forth over a restraint of trade, whether it's enforceable, what does it mean, etc. So essentially, a restraint of trade is an agreement between an employer and employee to say that the employee will not go and work for a competitor of the business or start their own business venture which competes directly with their current employer.
Okay.
And tied to that, generally, there is a fixed time period as well as a geographical area. So to say, for example, you aren't allowed to compete with your employer for a period of 2 years, for example, in the area of the Eastern Cape.
Okay.
So that's essentially in a nutshell what a clause looks like. And the reason that employers put these clauses in their contract is to protect their proprietary interests.
Okay.
So that can be their certain methodology that they use, that can be their clients' confidential information, and also the technical knowledge that's directly linked to the employer and the business as it operates.
Okay. Now that's interesting because I can understand as to why there would be a clause of that nature within it. But how does that really speak to, people just living generally and being able to then create a means to an income or, just the living for themselves at large?
Yeah, that's a great question because at the end of the day, all employees have the right to earn a living and to work in South Africa. However, when it comes to restraint of trade, it is an agreement that's entered into by the employee. So you can't unilaterally enforce a restraint of trade on an employee. So it is something that they agree to upfront. And unfortunately, it is often the case that when a new employee gets an employment contract, they don't go and read in depth in the contract. They don't look at the all the different clauses. Mainly, they look at their salary that they're going to be earning and then they sign it off. So sometimes employees are caught off guard by this restraint when it comes to the end of their employment. And at the end of the day, what the courts look at is the courts weigh up the interests of the employer versus the employee, and they look at several factors like whether or not you can enforce this restraint of trade in terms of the geographical area or the duration of it, and the courts weigh up the interests of both parties. And if it finds that the interests of the employee are being prejudiced more so than the employer, then the courts will generally find that that is an unenforceable restraint of trade.
Okay, so in the event where someone actually then does infringe on this particular clause, what are some of the risks or rather punishments or penalties that can be imposed on someone who does infringe?
Yeah, so the recourse that an employer has is they can approach the courts, so specifically the labour court, to ask for an interdict against the employee either going to work for this competitor or starting their own business, which is in direct competition with the employer. Ultimately, they can approach the courts for damages. And obviously, when they approach for damages, they would have to prove the damages that was caused or the potential damage that could be caused should this employee go and work for a competitor.
Sure, that is hectic. That is really, really hectic. And what are some of the time frames, of course, that can be imposed when it comes to the restraint of trade clause?
So when it comes to the time frames, there's no one-size-fits-all approach,
Okay.
especially when it comes to restraint of trade. It's very much dependent on the specific circumstances of the employment relationship, the nature of the business, and what the protectable interests are.
Okay.
So if I can use an example, if you have a company that has a strategy, let's say a 2-year strategy,
Sure.
a medium-term strategy, and that is of proprietary interest to the company, they can then say quite reasonably that the restraint of trade will be for 2 years.
Okay.
So there needs to be kind of a reason linked to the duration, and you can't say it's for 10 years or 20 years arbitrarily. It needs to be really linked to the protectable interest that the company is trying to protect.
Okay. Hectic stuff, man. So it's a clause that, yes, can be to protect those who are in business, but also then to avoid people actually just taking your intellectual property, of course, and then just running away with it. So I get it. I understand it. I think it really is unique and really niche, but yeah, also can be very scary.
Yeah. No, and that's why I always say that, we shouldn't just put a restraint of trade in a contract for the sake of having it there. Generally, restraints of trades are applicable to more senior employees or employees that have direct access on a daily basis to confidential information or protectable strategies that the company may have. So you're not going to give a restraint of trade to, let's say, a waitress or a waiter. It needs to be a more senior position or a position that has access to these protectable interests of the company.
Hectic stuff, man. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing this amazing insights. I mean, it's really important. But I think the take home for this today is read your contracts.
100%.
Read your contracts, man. Okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot. Top tip for the week. What would you say would be then your top tip that you'd like to impart then with employers and employees listening alike?
I think it goes both ways. So I think for the employers, they need to make sure that their contracts are well written, that the clause, if they do have a restraint of trade, that the clause is well written and is linked to the protectable interest. And then, as you say, for the employee, they need to go and read their contracts before they sign it, make sure that they know what they're getting into so that they don't get a surprise when they do leave the employment of the company.
No ta-das. I like that. I love that. Then let's quickly unpack on you, my good sir, and the amazing services that you guys render at LabourNet.
Yeah, so LabourNet is basically a one-stop compliance shop for HR needs for employers. So we provide labour law, which is obviously what I do. We have payroll services, transformation, health and safety, information compliance. We have a whole bouquet of products that we offer to businesses. We can get hold of us on www.labournet.com. We're also active on LinkedIn and all the socials. You can find us there.
Man, thank you so much, my good sir. Imparting a wealth of knowledge when it comes to your labour requirements, your labour law requirements rather. Be sure to tune in as we share some really insightful information, and also reach out to Mike and his team. They're based out in Fairview. You cannot miss them. Thank you so much, sir.